Hi everyone, it's Ren here. Hope you're doing well, guys. Seeing you a little bit sooner than I had anticipated, but inspiration sometimes happens and we can't explain it. Remember, my book, links below, if you want to have a look, support a fellow INFJ writer, if you like Dostoevsky, Kafka, and other great writers, consider getting it. I I was inspired by, as often happens, especially these days when I don't actually have a lot of time to come up with ideas by myself because I have work. My actual work really takes a lot of time, and my writing projects on the side take the majority of what's left. So often it's during conversations on forums or in comments that I become aware of potential topics to discuss. And in this video, what I want to discuss is the functional alternative to the dichotomous MBTI test. So when I refer to the dichotomous MBTI test, I refer to what you get if you do a 16 personalities type test, right? You answer a number of questions over 15 minutes and you get an answer as regards what your type is, according to dichotomies between extroversion, introversion, feeling and thinking, and so on. You'd be told you're 60% feeling, 40% thinking. So in a lot of videos, I have encouraged my viewers, encourage you to orient themselves towards looking at the function stack, cognitive function stack, NE, NI, FE, FI, and so on, in order to get a better sense of what their true type is. So I'm not going to go back on what the different reasons I had given at the time to do that. But I am aware of the fact that for some people, this idea of studying the cognitive functions is taken on board, but it's taken on board not quite in the right way. And what do I mean by this? I mean that these people, who are perfectly great, respectable people, by the way, decide that they're going to reorient their research on their type toward the cognitive functions, which is more precise and closer to the Jungian insight than MBTI. But at the same time, they still ultimately rest their conclusions on a test. Because there are many cognitive functions tests. There's one with similar minds, just one that comes to mind. There's other ones. I think keys to cognition rings a bell. Yeah. So now that's fine. You can explore your functional makeup via test. But the problem with this is that if you do that, you're not going to get much more than you would get if you were doing the dichotomous test. And the reason is simple, is because the limitations of the dichotomous test, 16 personalities, etc., are built in within the test itself, within the very concept of a test. It's based on your self-awareness, your willingness to be honest with yourself, and so on. And, I would go so far as to say that in certain respects, the cognitive functions tests are less reliable than the MBTI dichotomous tests. And the reason why I think that they're potentially less reliable is that their purpose and their raison d'être is not quite as clear and is somewhat confused. When you take a dichotomous test, well, sure, it has limitations, and I've been harping on about these many times in the past. But at least when it asks questions, most of those questions are relatively straightforward and they capture relatively straightforward traits. There's vagueness, there's confusion, blah, 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 blah. It's not perfect, hence why I prefer other methods. But there is a reasonable relationship, reasonably good relationship, imperfect but reasonably good, between a question and what it is intended to capture. The problem with a cognitive functions test is that in addition to having the typical issues that have to do with the psychology of a person doing the test, well, the other issue, and this issue is not as prominent in the dichotomous tests, is that it is a lot more difficult to ask a question which captures a function. And that's the reason why what I encourage is not to do a cognitive functions test, although you can do that if you want, so long as you don't take the results as gospel, just as you should not take the results of the dichotomous test as gospel. What I encourage is the qualitative study of the functions, which means that you have plenty of websites, the best source being probably Jung's own work in the psychology of types, where you get a qualitative, detailed description of each function. And you familiarize yourself with how they are described and what examples are given for their manifestation and what descriptions are given for their interrelationships. And once you have that in mind, you can start the process of looking back at yourself and seeing what you relate to more. And it might take time. It might take some time to come to grips with what you identify with most, whether it be NI or NE or TI. It might take some time because you have to, here again, you might have to surmount some inherent biases, but at least you're not under time pressure. You can take your time to get to an answer. You can exchange with other people, and you get to your tentative answer on that basis. It's not as immediately gratifying as a test is, because it doesn't just, you don't plug in the answer in the input, and then you get the answer thrown out, and you're this, and it's great. No, like you have to. It's like research. It really is self-research. It's not just self-assessment. It's self-research. The problem with the cognitive functions test is it's not self-research. It is still a test which is all the more likely to be unreliable because, in addition to the typical weaknesses of a test, it is going to ask you questions which you don't know about that, but the inbuilt mechanism of the test will be designed in such a way that the question, depending on what you answer, will be correlating to FI or correlating to TE or correlating to SI. Now, you won't be able to guess that, but the problem is, I think that a lot of these questions are not properly correlated. So if a question is supposed to capture FE, depending on how you answer to it, the strength of your FE, well, the question is actually not specific enough because it could just as well capture FI. And the result is that you have ENFJs who take the test and they get ISFP. And they don't understand. And it's not normal that an ENFJ gets ISFP as a result, and of the cognitive functions test. Even if you assume that the ENFJ does not have the best self-awareness, it is very strange that they should get ISFP as a response. If that's what they get as the output, as their result, maybe there's something wrong with the test. And you will notice, if you've done cognitive functions tests in the past, that if you're reasonably certain through other types of self-research that you're an INFJ, you'll typically notice that your NE tends to be returned as quite strong, which is possible, but the FI nearly as strong as the FE, and the SI. Now, in the case of SI, that's nonsense. An INFJ's SI is not strong. In those cognitive functions tests, sometimes SI is the fifth strongest functions, and I've seen that happen to a lot of different INFJs who have taken the test, and I know these people are INFJs because I'm familiar with them. So the questions are not adequately capturing what they're intended to capture, and so the results are not going to be reliable. In this case, not through your own overwhelming subjectivity, but through the objectivity of the objective flaws of the mechanism of the test. And this is what you tend to get. This is what you tend to get. You get these strange results, functions that should not be there. And there's a simple reason. I think, why a cognitive functions test is not a satisfactory test, in my opinion. The reason is a function in itself is a very fine-grained, precise phenomenon to describe. It takes Jung a lot of time to describe them each in turn. It takes some time to properly understand what it's all about. Right. So at some stage in the research, you get to understand. It takes a while. How can you expect that to be captured in a simple 1 or 2 line question? I don't think it is possible. So looking into the functions is the way to go, but preferably not through a test. Because if you do that through a test of the cognitive functions, you're going to cancel the potential benefits of research into the functions by bringing them back to the deficiencies of a test. Now, I hope this convinced you to engage in qualitative study. This implies that you have the patience to do so, but I really encourage you. Let me know what you think in the comments, guys. See you soon.